This year is truly going to be a big year for history. Two of the oldest men to run for office are going to go head to head in America for the presidency, possibly through bars. After COVID, Brexit, 14 years of pissing all over the NHS, the Conservatives finally look like they're going to be put out of office by Labour. And it has to be said, after trying to read his biography, if anybody's making me vote for Keir Starmer, you know they've done a terrible job. Scotland decided to pass a law that was so vague that everybody's torn it to shreds. This isn't even mentioning the two major wars we have going on in Israel and the Ukraine. But to trump all this, Games Workshop have decided there has always been female Adeptus Custodies. Now I'm a little late to the game on this one. I did make a video last Sunday pertaining to this topic, but I wasn't happy with the result, so I decided to remake it. And also, as I often say, I try not to make videos just for the sake of making videos, but I am quite a fan of the 40k franchise. I started playing Warhammer 40,000 when I was about 13, and I can still remember buying my first box set. I'd went into Newcastle on the bus, into the local Games Workshop, tipped out the pricely sum of £30 for the 3rd edition Blood Angels vs Orcs, all little plastic miniatures, and you even had some cardboard buildings in there. Not like these days when you get about 3 for the same price. And then the first thing I saw when I came out the shop was the tramp pick up a strawberry and eat it off the floor, and I felt incredibly guilty for just tipping out 30 quid on a toy. Now I have to confess, I haven't played a game of 40k in years. It involves going to public places and meeting people, which is not really my forte. But I have been known to dabble in painting miniatures and customising them, and I do like to read the better books. I'm the first to admit that some of the Warhammer 40,000 books are written by hacks. But it is a 3-decade-old, very immersive franchise with some hardcore fans. So it was that I was put to some shame when I visited my friend the other week, and he, who does not follow 40k at all, told me that in his words, custodians have women now. It took me a moment to actually realise he meant the custodians from 40k, and then a quick search in that visual Library of Alexandria YouTube, that yes, Games Workshop have indeed decided to include ladies in the ranks of the Adeptus Custodies. Moreover, this is not just some, all of a sudden we can now make female Adeptus Custodies. There has always been female Adeptus Custodies. They've somehow managed never to be in a single book written in the last 30 years by the Black Library though. I feel somewhat qualified to talk about this topic, not only because of my background knowledge of it, but because I really couldn't care one way or the other if there was female Adeptus Custodies or not. Especially when the jury's still out on whether Space Marines have testicles or not. Firstly though, for the two of you amongst us that don't know what Warhammer 40,000 is, Warhammer 40,000 was developed in the 90s by the Games Workshop company as a setting to facilitate sci-fi war games and tabletop games. In the interim, it has branched out into other media, including computer games and books, and there's even been talk of Henry Cavill making a telly programme for it. Now in the 40k setting, Space Marines are the poster boys, the Ultramarines. They're all over the bloody shop. As you can probably tell by this video, the vast majority of it is full of Space Marines. And the odd Eldar, of course. Just to clarify on the actual Custodies though, they are not Space Marines. They predate the Space Marines, and Custodies' creation process is completely different. Consider, if you will, a Space Marine is a chavmobile. It guns a bit quicker because the chav's been under the engine and it's got a lot of bits stuck into it. Like the spoiler, the exhaust you can get your head up, all them blacked out windows, and that lovely new paint job. The Custodies, on the other hand, would be an Audi, built from scratch up from the ground by a German master. They more or less do the same thing at the end of the day, a very different process, and one goes much better than the other. Now I have to say it again, if I haven't said it already, that the fact that there are now female Custodies neither shocks nor appalls me. Games Workshop has went to considerable lengths to be inclusive in its content. It's also very fair to say that Games Workshop needs no permission of anybody, what it does with its own law. It's a bit like telling God that he can't make giraffes. I would say, however, that if you got out of bed one morning, scratched your balls, went to make a coffee, looked out the window and saw a giraffe in your garden, you might possibly wonder how it got there. Which is my way of saying that when Games Workshop do implement this change, I hope they do it with a little bit of respect and thought, unlike some other franchises I might possibly mention.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
So I'd like to discuss mostly why so many people's backs are up about this. There's people who got their back up because there are female custodies, of course, but there are also people who have their back up because some other people got their back up about there being female custodies. There are a lot of backs up at the moment. It's almost like people like arguing on the internet. First, let me address the pro-inclusion mob. I believe that many of you will consider this a victory, and perhaps it is, but please let me encourage you to be graceful in victory. If somebody disagrees with you, it may be well for you to listen to why they disagree with you, rather than just laying into them as to why they're wrong. It generally is a little bit more involved than we just don't like women. Many indeed feel this is incredibly pandering and not a step towards equality at all. For evidence, I'll point out there was very little pushback when females were added to other armies such as the Eldar and the Imperial Guard. I suppose I should call them the Astra Militarum these days. I'm showing my age. Of course you think you're right, because if you didn't think you were right, then you'd probably be thinking something else. That being said, that does not mean that everybody who disagrees with you deserves the tongue lashing and name calling. This advice can also be applied to the other side of the argument. Whereas you may not like the changes Games Workshop has suddenly wrought on its, and while I'm sure many of the people who push for such changes do have narcissistic motivations, there are a good many who do actually think that this is a good thing and they are doing it from a place of kindness. So please, before we start shouting political correctness gone wrong and diversity gone mad, please respect that even if we disagree with them, they are trying to be kind. Games Workshop finds itself in the position where its franchise, which was perfectly acceptable in the 90s, has come under scrutiny from modern political agendas. Though I believe having more money than God might ease the transition somewhat. But this is a transition that's been going on for several decades now, where old established franchises find themselves coming under modern scrutiny. It may be interesting another 30 years down the line to see what other changes have been wrought and what we'll make of the changes that were implemented during the 2020s. But for myself, I must agree with the Lawmaster Luton. Of all the great changes and upheavals that are happening, this is not one of them. This is a little change to the law of Games Workshop that may easily be ignored if one does not find it palatable. There are other changes that have been made under the banner of equality and representation that I completely disagree with. But I think it's wise to make sure that any complaints made against such changes are considered actions and not reflex actions. Which is why this issue has perhaps generated a disproportionate amount of noise. Not so much because of what it is in itself, but of the company it keeps.